Good evening, everyone. Paul McCormick, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen for Dennis. I'd like to welcome all the boards for both Dennis, Harwich, and Yarmouth here for the discussion tonight. It's a very important discussion. Wastewater is something that won't go away, and this will present a partnership between these three towns that will help ensure better wastewater prevention in the future and what we're going to do to not only eliminate some wastewater problems, but also to do it in a very affordable manner. If you could switch the slide, please, into two more ahead, I would appreciate it. Oh, I'd also want to tell you that this meeting is being taped tonight, and that the copies of the tapes will be provided to all three towns so that they can present them over their own systems that are there. So tonight we're going to have an overview of the efficiency and the regionalization grant that's been awarded to Dennis, Harwich, and Yarmouth. We're going to review the Mass DEP input to date that we've had. We're going to talk about the comprehensive wastewater management plans, ones that have been done before in other towns and one that we're looking to do here. We're going to have an overview for the discussions and preliminary cost savings. These are things that we're looking ahead on. We're going to have a proposed project schedule, a proposed town meeting article to be presented at both Dennis, Harwich, and Yarmouth's town meetings this coming season in May, and our proposed legislation that we've been going to be talking about. And then we'll have a discussion. We'll take questions from both the panel and the public. I would like to mention a few dignitaries that we have here that we are lucky to have with us today. We have Commissioner for the Mass DEP, Martin Suberg, who is with us today, who was gracious enough to meet with representatives from all three towns at his office in the State House not too long ago. Deputy Commissioner of Mass DEP, Gary Moran, Regional Administrator, Mass DEP, Millie Garcia-Serrano, and Brian Dudley, who is from DEP, who does a lot of yeoman's work for us. And so with that, I will, if you could flip the slides. Okay, there we are. And Dan is going to, Napick is going to have a little discussion on efficiency and regionalization grant.
Thank you, Paul. Good evening. The towns of Dennis, Harwich, and Yarmouth applied originally for a grant of $200,000 last year. We had mentioned that at the meeting, and that application in that first round last year was turned away. So we retooled the grant opportunity. There was another $2 million available by the Commonwealth to promote regionalization efforts. So we decided as three sets of communities to add Barnstable to the application, hoping that it would make a stronger regional partnership. And the issue with Barnstable is more with Yarmouth and Barnstable. And then we also preserved some money for Dennis, Harwich, and Yarmouth to continue the planning process. So we were fortunate that the Administration and Finance Division of the state government recognized the importance of our grant application and awarded the four communities $150,000. $100,000 will be shared amongst the towns of Dennis, Harwich, and Yarmouth for this effort that we're going to talk to you tonight about. The efficiency and regionalization grants have been critical across the Commonwealth to try to underwrite some of the costs to get regional conversations started. And up on the slide, you can see that in our general region, including down on the Cape a little bit towards the canal, there was some regionalization underway there, and also off Cape, there were some on the seacoast communities as well. There were other communities across the Commonwealth on this same topic that also were awarded money. So the issue of nitrogen sensitive areas is not just a problem unique to Cape Cod, it's actually occurring across the Commonwealth and in many parts of New England as well. So we are fortunate to have this opportunity that we were available to receive the grant, and with that we will continue our planning process to get in position to work to have a regional solution to present to a future town meeting for the people to consider.
Terrific. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to have some time to offer Mass DEP's perspective. I want to start with a theme that I'll probably return to a couple of times as I speak, for these next couple of minutes, which is to really, congratulate you and express our support for the tremendous work that the towns are doing together on an important issue, taking control of the solution that gets designed to deal with a very important issue that affects the environment and the economy of a very important part of the Commonwealth. And so in that spirit, I'd like to offer a few comments. First of all, I appreciate your recognizing Gary Moran, Millie, and Brian Dudley. All of them have spent years working on water quality issues, particularly water quality issues in the Cape, and especially on the 208 plan that I will talk a little bit about as we talk here tonight. They are people that have a history of working on this project, and they are resources that hopefully the communities will feel free to call upon going forward as we work together on this issue. The type of collaborative effort to resolving your common wastewater problems are precisely the type of things that we were hoping that we would see in this 208 planning process that began in 2013. As Administrator Knappich noted, we've been aware for some time of the growing water quality problems facing Cape Cod. With a dramatic increase in development and population, more and more nitrogen has been discharged into the Cape's waterways, primarily from septic systems. This contamination poses, as I noted, both environmental and issues related to the economy, where we are fortunate to live in an area that is rightfully proud of its natural resources. For over a decade, we at Mass DEP have worked closely with Cape communities and the University of Massachusetts through the Massachusetts Estuaries Project to provide scientific studies needed to effectively address water quality issues impacting each of the estuaries on the Cape. The studies made it clear that we need to take action now to address this threat to the environment, economy, and quality of life. The continuing nature of the problem has led not only to increased threats of degradation to the environment, but has also led to litigation and the prospect of significant government regulation and enforcement to address the process of cleaning the waters. To help design another path to facilitate a solution in which communities could effectively play a role, Mass DEP in 2013 directed the Cape Cod Commission and provided financial support to do it, to prepare an updated regional water quality plan in accordance with the Federal Clean Water Act. And over the next 2 years, Cape Cod citizens and communities came together and through extensive public input developed a plan known as the 208 plan. And as I've noted, this plan emphasizes local decision-making to determine the best, most cost-effective solutions rather than those that would be imposed either by the state or federal government on communities. The plan encourages communities to share treatment systems to reduce costs, to support innovation and natural solutions where possible, while recognizing the need to act in accordance to a schedule. Since the plan's adoption, we've seen communities across the Cape working, much like yourselves. We've seen Falmouth moving forward to expand its wastewater collection system to priority watersheds while piloting alternative strategies. In Chatham, which took action early on and is now moving to expand its wastewater system to work with Harwich to help address mutual challenges. The communities of Popponesset Bay, Mashpee, Sandwich, and Barnstable have an intermunicipal agreement which outlines their responsibilities. We also have the Pleasant Bay communities, Brewster, Chatham, Orleans, and Harwich, working with the Pleasant Bay Alliance to develop nitrogen removal strategies, and are working closely with Mass DEP to develop an innovative new permitting approach called a watershed permit, which provides nitrogen reduction credit for these alternative approaches, such as shellfish propagation or permeable reactive burial walls. Bourne, Mashpee, and Falmouth are also looking at collaborating with Joint Base Cape Cod to look for opportunities to maximize use of base facility for mutual community benefit. And as we're here tonight, the work of your three communities to develop a potential community partnership, and this collaboration has been impressive. One of the major themes of the 208 plan is the importance of communities working on a collaborative basis to evaluate the data and the science and identify a regional shared approach that can meet water quality goals. On behalf of the Baker-Polito administration, I do want to commend these communities for your diligent efforts to explore how a community partnership can serve to both achieve the environmental goals we need to achieve and do so in a cost-effective manner. The administration earlier this year, as you heard from Mr. Knappich, awarded to Dennis, Harwich, Yarmouth, and Barnstable a $150,000 Community Compact Efficiency Grant, and we at DEP were pleased to provide support for that effort, and we recognize the value of that funding in your planning work. This effort holds the promise not only to meet water quality goals, but to identify the most cost-effective solutions. As I said at the beginning, the time for action is truly upon us. It is now. Timely action can stop not only the degradation of the Cape's estuaries, but it can also begin restoring these waterways. We're committed at Mass DEP to working cooperatively with you, and we're committed to sharing our science and our technical assistance to develop the best solutions. We've been asked from time to time, what is the price of inaction? What will happen if actions don't move forward? And we were asked that as recently as February of 2017. And again, we at Mass DEP believe community action is the way to go. It is the most effective tool. We at the Commonwealth, we have other tools, but there are tools that again, we are very conscious of making sure that we are working with communities and that the responses fit the community's goals. If called upon, we have the ability under Title V to develop nitrogen-sensitive areas. We can change groundwater discharge permit and regulatory processes. We, under our existing statutory authorities, can form water pollution abatement districts to direct action. But again, our preference is, in all of these areas, is to work with the communities, like the communities we've outlined, like these communities, to develop effective strategies so that the additional state and federal regulatory tools are not needed and communities can get full credit for the work they're already doing. The benefits of community action are also that we avoid the prospect of future litigation. Again, the good news is that the litigation that led us to the 208 plan is right now stayed. But if we're not making progress as a state, if we're not making progress with our communities, it is always a risk that it is possible that litigation would begin again. And so we believe that the approach that these communities, your communities, are taking is the appropriate approach. Again, we're committing our support, and we are committing our technical assistance, and we look forward to working with you. And once again, on behalf of our administration, we really want to congratulate you for the extensive work done to date, and we look forward to you working moving forward.
Good. Thank you very much, Marty, and thank you for working this meeting into your very busy schedule. What we'd like now is to do the updates from the three town administrators as to where their plans stand.
Thank you, David and Commissioner Suberg. And thanks everyone for coming out tonight on this wonderful second day of spring here. So I'm going to give the update for the town of Dennis. Dennis has been working on their wastewater and implementation for over a decade here in some capacity. Over the last year, we've moved from the wastewater task force into the wastewater implementation committee. And also the past 11 months have been working cooperatively with our neighboring towns that you see here tonight. Specifically, Dennis is working on its draft comprehensive wastewater management plan. We meet monthly. We most recently, the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee endorsed our cost recovery plan that was outlined several months ago. So that plan is to be filed with the Massachusetts Environmental Policy, or the MEPA office, and the Cape Cod Commission. That will be filed simultaneously. We hope to have that filed, or we anticipate that will be filed by this summer. And again, those meetings are happening monthly. They're public meetings, and we appreciate public input by our residents. The other update we have is our Bass River Railroad Cape Cod Rail Trail Bridge Abutment Project. We recently, this week, there was a letter that went to MassDOT. Both the towns of Yarmouth and Dennis are working cooperatively in the Bass River watershed to develop a program that meets our nutrient and nitrogen loading for these watersheds. And this would benefit as one of the prime effluent recharge sites is along the Bass River. Improved flushing resulting from the widening would benefit both towns. So we're hopeful that MassDOT will set up a meeting with us in the near future. And also, the town of Dennis we had an approved project through town meeting last year for an aquaculture pilot project. The purpose of this project in Swan Pond is to conduct a feasibility study of oyster aquaculture as a nitrogen remediation strategy for the town's wastewater mitigation planning. This would be in addition to any other wastewater implementation scenarios. This is something that's a pilot project. If it was to work, we would probably plan future projects such as this. But the goal of this project is to demonstrate good oyster growth and survival, and to see if that can occur in the Swan Pond watershed, and if that would have a meaningful impact on water quality. And finally, the town also recently conducted an economic study by the UMass Donahue Institute, and it's in draft format right now. It will come back before the Wastewater Implementation Committee at our next meeting for final comments. Once that is finalized by the committee's input, it would be a public report available to the public on our website. We're in conversations with our neighboring community of Yarmouth about the potential to do a phase 2 on the economic study. But there's been a lot of significant work over the last year that's been built upon over the last decade that Dennis has been strongly working on their wastewater efforts. So, thank you.
Team effort, and certainly the town of Harwich, several of the residents have committed large amounts of money in which to progress our project forward. And I think that we have already a partnership with Chatham, and we look forward to continue our partnership with now adding in Dennis and Yarmouth. So with that being said, our project status, and we made a lot of progress in the time that I've been here, and certainly before. We have a final CWMP, a comprehensive wastewater management plan, that was approved by the Commonwealth of Mass and the Cape Cod Commission in 2016. The plan overall is about $240 million. It has 8 phases and is anticipated to be completed over 40 years. To that, it's not just sewers in the ground. We are doing innovative technology. So as you can see on the screen, we have out of the 8 phases, we basically have phase 1 is completed. So we have a Cold Brook attenuation study, which is converting the cranberry bog into an area in which we can have it remove nitrogen naturally. This project was, back in my place, I don't have to push the button, it just automatically goes. Same mic too, so. So on the Colebrook, we have already completed the Colebrook attenuation study. It's converting cranberry bogs into a system that would allow for the natural removal. The residents of Harwich have already committed $2 million to doing the feasibility and the design and the construction of that system. So we are now at the point where the study is done. We are currently in design. That one we are doing a partnership with our Harwich Conservation Trust. So we are very actively involved with our partners in the community. The Muddy Creek project, bridge attenuation project, was basically to open up a culvert, allow for the natural tidal flow of the ocean to come in and take some of the contaminants out. This project is almost $5 million. I'm happy to report that we had about almost $4 million in grants to accomplish that. It was in partnership, a 50-50 partnership with the town of Chatham, so we certainly have a track record in Harwich of working cooperatively with folks. The results, I thought, came out very well, and we are now in the monitoring stage to see how that final long-term impact comes out. In terms of our most recent activities, last year at town meeting approved, I think, about $12 million. That was at town meeting and at the ballot for our funding of the initial payments and ultimately the long-term payments with Chatham for their intermunicipal agreement. The town of Harwich is putting in 8 miles of pipe, 6 pump stations, and we will be sending material to the town of Chatham facility, and they will be processing that material for us, about 300,000 gallons per day. So that element of the IMA is complete. The next phase for us at this coming town meeting in May is to request $22+ million to put the pipes in the ground for the Pleasant Bay Watershed South, so literally building the sewer system. And that will be for at the annual town meeting, as well as on the ballot for the residents to vote. And I think that we do have also for town meeting warrant, and you'll hear later about the partnership of looking at working with the 2 other towns to progress. So far, we've done the eastern part of Harwich, and this part, the partnership in this would help us do the central and western part. So that's kind of a status report as to where the town of Harwich is in terms of our project.
Dan?
Does the slide advance on its own, or? Thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate that. I arrived in town January 24th, 2017. 20 minutes into my tenure, I was given the talk. In Yarmouth, the board members know the history far better than I do, but in 2011, the town underwent a meeting to decide whether or not it wanted to advance a project back then. And the message that I received through the talk was that we needed to find a better way if we were ever going to be successful, a better way of financing the project. So along the way, in March, we had the meeting here about a year ago at this time, and the walk away from that is that the 3 towns, the boards would appoint delegates to begin a regional meeting, and we have been meeting faithfully as a group since June of last year. And we've been collaborating and talking about a lot of different issues. And the interesting thing about what you're going to hear tonight is Harwich is probably 2 years or so ahead of Yarmouth in its effort, and Dennis is probably a year or so ahead of us in that effort. But what's nice about the meetings that we've had is that we've been able to see pathway and borrow from each other different strategies and ideas that could be beneficial by the time we get to put a project in front of the voters. Now, one of the things that we needed to do was to look at how is it that we could do something different that wouldn't just put the burden right on the taxpayers. And you see up there on the screen at the very last bullet, some of the capital road improvement projects. So the Parkers River Bridge, which the viaduct over the Parkers River clearly needed to be replaced, but that has a great benefit to us. So that project will be put out to bid soon and be under construction, I believe, by the fall of this year. And with that comes, when it's completed, reduction in the number of homes that would have to be treated with a sewer pipe. So that clearly started a follow-up conversation about where are these other projects that we could have in town that could have a similar style impact. And certainly the Bass River Bridge is another one that looks to have that kind of impact, and that's on the Massachusetts DOT Transportation Improvement Project plan for a future replacement very shortly. The rail trail bridge that was recently installed, that also has an impact that will reduce the need to sewer in that particular area. And we've opened up recently a dialogue with Commissioner Suberg about enlisting support for a Route 6 bridge project that right now is tapped at a very large sum of dollars, but we all understand that the bridge at some point is going to need replacement, but that project too promises to have a significant reduction for us as well. So all of those things teaming together help to formulate the strategy that we would use going forward. The other issue that became apparent is that the approach that we're taking is that there's an opportunity for a regional partnership to develop a facility to treat the wastewater, but the collection and what that looks like within our communities is solely up to us. And in Yarmouth, the Board of Selectmen are the sewer commissioners, and as part of their task, we put a committee proposal in front of them, and they were passed that, and we have assembled a number of members in the community from different watersheds and different commissions, and that committee will soon begin its process of developing, with town resident input, what our future plan looks like to put forward to a future town meeting for a vote. And along the way, though, we also undertook a Urban Land Institute. We got a grant from the Cape Cod Commission to study the economic impact, if you will, in two localized areas around Route 28. In the work that was done in that grant, it reinforced the message that was kind of subtly out there as an anecdote, that with every day that we don't have a wastewater solution, and the commercial district particularly, is every day that reinvestment is put off. And I've heard since I've been in town from a number of developers that frankly just don't want to be in that business, and when will the town get around to doing something about that? So all of us struggled with that, and Dennis, we were pleased to find out, had undertaken a study, and we all anxiously await the final results on that, and we'll look to build off of those findings. Sometime in September of this year, we'll look to go in front of the board as the charged Water Resources Committee to put the cost recovery plan in front of the board for consideration, and that's going to be a work in progress as it relates to what are the different options. Like the other towns, we're looking at aquaculture. Like Harwich, that has been able to make a connection to Chatham to reduce the cost. We turned to Barnstable on the west end of town because we knew that the largest driver of our cost in the local collection system would be the cost to do a solution in West Yarmouth. So it didn't make any sense to not talk to Barnstable, because over in Hyannis in the Lewis Bay region, they have a treatment facility. So that's why we turned to them and applied with the grant with them, with their permission, to help study what that would look like. And again, with a further conscientious effort to try to reduce the cost to the lowest possible amount that we can. So all of that's going on, and we're moving forward with our final approval as well, sometime scheduled in 2019.
Thank you, Liz, Chris, and Dan. That was a good overview of the three towns. My name is David Young. I'm with the firm of CDM Smith, and we've had the honor of working with these three towns for the past several years to help them develop their wastewater program. I'd also be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Michaela Bogosh and Kara Johnston sitting up and back, because they've done most of the work in preparation for this meeting tonight. So thank you. As we've been doing this program for each of the three towns, they've all challenged us to come up with a way to lower the cost of their program. They're all facing over $200 million in programs. So as Dan mentioned, a year ago, March 8th, we all, or some of you, were sitting in this room, and we kicked off the idea of the three towns doing the treatment and effluent recharge in a partnership. They have to do their internal programs to remove the amount of nitrogen, so that's within their own purview. But instead of building 3 wastewater plants and coming up with multiple effluent recharge sites within their communities and all, we floated the idea of doing one. And so far, as you've heard, it's been successful, positive thoughts in terms of pursuing that. and now we were successful in getting a grant to continue those discussions. So the committee, or a year ago, the selectmen from each town voted to create a subgroup, and that subgroup has been meeting on a monthly basis since last June. From each of the 3 towns, including the town administrator, a representative from the Board of Selectmen, and then individual town staff as they felt appropriate who should be coming to the meetings as well. Overall, I think the meetings have been very positive. We actually went in and met with the commissioner and Representative Whalen in Boston to get some of their input and feedback, and sought their support for the grant, which we were successful in, and I think that had to do a lot with that support that we gained. And we've also looked at some preliminary numbers beyond what was put forth a year ago. And in aggregate, the 3 towns would be looking at saving around $100 million. It's not insignificant. And more importantly, they'd be looking to offset around $6.5 million from the operations of treatment plants and the effluent reuse. So all those details need to be worked out, and that's what we'll be working on over the next year. But if you look at that, that's some significant money that the towns can look to be saving. This is a rough projection of the amount of wastewater currently proposed to be collected from each of the 3 towns. Those numbers are still being refined. Particularly, Dennis is looking to potentially revise theirs a little bit based on the economic study that was done. They want to make sure that they've got enough wastewater capacity built into their program to be able to address the smart growth that they desire. And Yarmouth, as Dan mentioned, that is their full town projection, but they may be looking to break off some of that and send it to Barnstable now, because that's one of their most costly components of being part of this plan, in that they would have to convey wastewater from West Yarmouth over to Dennis. So if they can break off some of that, send it to Barnstable, it's more cost effective for them to do that. So those numbers are approximations at this point as we stand here today. But excuse me, the thing to keep in mind is that wastewater will be coming from the 3 towns to a central plant located in Dennis near the DPW, and then that very high quality treated wastewater, effluent, would be reused in multiple sites in all 3 towns. One of the prime sites is that we're looking at now and is along the Bass River, is the Bass River Golf Course, and it has a tremendous potential, but it'd be helped by further flushing if we can get the Route 6 bridge widened. And that could be used for irrigating that golf course. You know, some other things that we've looked at is potential vehicle washing stations for DPW type vehicles, as well as, you know, something else, a tree farm or something that we want to use, because we want to look at that highly treated effluent as a product, not as a waste material. So if we took the plans that are currently defined in all 3 towns and we put them all on one map, that's what this would look like. Each community is looking at doing 8 phases, roughly 5 years per phase, so it's a 40-year implementation. Some of these may be revised over the next year so that communities like Harwich can address the Route 28 area instead of up near where their treatment plant would have been proposed, their second plant. They're currently looking up at the East Harwich area first, which, as Chris Clark noted, is going to Chatham. But when they get into their next phases, they could be dealing with the 28 area, Harwich, Port, West, to go over into Dennis. And similarly, Yarmouth will be doing an economic study, and they may look at doing the Route 28 area to address some of that revitalization as well. You've heard mention that all 3 towns are actually looking at not just putting sewers in the ground. They're doing other innovative things. Aquaculture, some are looking at some permeable reactive barriers. We had done an EPA program here in Dennis. But all are also looking at inlet widening. bridge widening. Harwich and Chatham successfully created or did the Muddy Creek project. If you haven't been by there, I'd strongly encourage you to go by there. I think it came out beautiful, and the flushing up and down that river is greatly improved the water quality there. They're in the process of, Yarmouth is in the process of doing the Parker's River Bridge to widen that up into Long Pond. And that would help potentially if there's an effluent recharge site up north in the Buck Island Road area. And the Cape Cod Rail Trail, this is a picture, the lower portion. Now this is existing conditions. It doesn't reflect the new rail trail bridge that has been recently installed. But you can see the rail trail bridge that was there. That one, as shown, was 60 feet wide and pretty much straight in abutments. The new bridge is over 80 feet wide in the water and goes to 160-foot wide carry. So significantly improved there. I think it's very noticeable. You don't see the whirlpool in between the rail trail bridge and the Route 6 bridge anymore. And if you've ever kayaked through there, you don't go too fast because you get stuck. But we're looking, and as alluded to, a letter was sent by actually all three towns, even though Dennis and Yarmouth share the Bass River. That effluent recharge site down gradient from this would benefit Harwich as well. So all three towns have asked for a meeting with the Mass Department of Transportation to discuss this option. Some preliminary flushing modeling studies have been done, and the recommended option that would like to be pursued would be to essentially double the width of the Route 6 bridges. That would bring it back to what was known as the natural opening. So they're roughly now about 150 foot wide. That would bring it to a little over 300 feet wide. But the reality is that that would offset, and it needs to be finalized and all, but about 700 homes from having to be sewered in that northern area. Now that would be shared between Dennis and Yarmouth, but that adds up to some significant money to both communities and operating costs that gets offset from that. So that's why we want to have the discussion, see if we can't do this in a partnership with MassDOT. We're not asking them to do the whole thing, not asking them to do it tomorrow, just want to have the conversation. So each community, again, is looking to do other aspects of addressing nitrogen removal instead of just putting pipes in the ground. So some of the advantages that have been discussed at the subgroup meetings over the last year include, the construction and operating costs that we just showed you, the $100 million and $6.5 million operating. It would obviously restore the water bodies and the overall aesthetics of these areas. It would help with the reuse of that high-quality effluent, be it at a golf course or the vehicle washing stations. We'd be able to work with the regulators, either Mass DEP or Cape Cod Commission as part of their review to meet what's known as a total maximum daily load. Simple terms, what that means is the amount of nitrogen that can go into a water body and still maintain a healthy environment in that water body. So all of these watersheds that we've been looking at here need to have some nitrogen removed from them. You saw them in the town administrators updates, the percent of septic system nitrogen removal, which is where the vast majority of that nitrogen is coming from. It would also improve by having one plant instead of three smaller plants, the treatment aspect of treating that wastewater. By collecting the wastewater from three towns and sending it to one plant, you don't quite have the flow swings, particularly in the tourist environment that we all live in here today. You get 3-to-1 swings, summer to average year round. That would be offset here because you'd be having the flow from the three towns sent to it. Sort of think of yourself. If you skip a meal for a day, you know it. This is a living organism. You want to keep feeding it on a regular basis. So it would also help operate and maintain the treatment facility and share that responsibility with one staff instead of each community having to come up with treatment staff on their own. And we all know there's a shortage of treatment plant operators today, so that would be a tremendous benefit as well. This would also help address the sort of next thing that we'll all be talking about. You know, we're all talking about nutrients today, but quickly coming up behind it is contaminants of emerging concern. We've already seen that in some of the water supplies here on the Cape. So if you've already collected that wastewater and it's going to a central treatment plant, if something needed to be added to that to address one of the contaminants of emerging concern, it's already at a central location and we could do the treatment plant there, the treatment process. So that's a benefit. It would simplify the governance. This DHY community partnership would be a separate governing body. It would oversee the treatment and collection. The towns would still oversee, the treatment and the reuse. The towns would still be in charge of their own collection systems, as envisioned anyway today. All open to discussion. And the construction of sewers in the commercial areas, as I mentioned in some of that phasing, could be done to help address the smart growth that each of the communities desires, and help protect some of the historic districts by allowing that smart growth to occur versus the 40Bs and some of the others that are coming in and starting to show some disruption to that. And lastly, and this just proved to be the case when we filed the state revolving fund loan application for Harwich in the East Harwich area for going to Chatham. We ended up with the highest ranked SRF loan application because it's part of a regional process. So it shows that the regional points do count, and the SRF program is a competitive process. As more communities start to move forward, there's going to be more competition for those 0 and 2% interest loans, and I'm sure the commissioner could speak better than I, but who knows how long the SRF money continues to flow from Washington down to the state, and we keep up at the levels that we're currently funded. So it's an important aspect as well. This concept of a community partnership and the programs that each community is looking to implement, these have all been done before. We looked at the cost of the water programs in each of the 3 communities. And as you heard me say earlier, the wastewater programs were over $200 million. We looked at the capital asset value of the water systems in each of the 3 towns, and they're all over $200 million. So each community has already undertaken and successfully implemented a similar program on the water side. Now you're facing the wastewater side. So it's just looking at implementing another utility. And more importantly, we've just been involved with a very similar instance. It's known as the MFN Regional Wastewater District, which came into being in 2014. It addresses the wastewater needs in the towns of Mansfield, Foxborough, and Norton. You can see my creativity, how I just use letters. Short story, 25 years ago, town of Mansfield and town of Foxborough and Norton were all going to build their own 3-town treatment plant. 2 of the towns went to town meeting, they both passed funding. One of the towns went to town meeting the next night, they chose not to pass funding. So when the 2 towns reconvened, the first 2 towns reconvened the next week, one of those towns backed out. Mansfield went ahead and built the plant on their own money, on their own dime. Of course, it was back in the 90% money came from federal and state, which is long gone, and 10% from the town. Over that 25-year period, they actually did sell capacity at their cost to Mansfield and Foxborough and signed intermunicipal agreements for those communities to use it. When they went to update their comprehensive wastewater management plans, they were all looking to expand their wastewater capacity and needs. After some cajoling and a lot of talking, we finally got the 3 towns to sit in the same room and talk to one another. They didn't get along very well at first. After 2 years, they developed an agreement that resulted in the MFN Regional Wastewater District. And since 2014, that district has been operating seamlessly. They are currently in a $30+ million, 1 million gallon a day expansion of the treatment plant to handle the needs of those 3 communities, and the costs are being shared. It's run by a 7-commissioner or 7-member commission with an executive director. So it provides a lot of good templates for these 3 towns to be using. It's already seen by the town meeting article that's put forth to propose potential special legislation. It was crafted from the MFN district. The special legislation itself is available, as is the agreement, which the subgroup over the last year has actually been reviewing and sees a lot of similarities. And so, again, it provides a very good template for the discussions going forward. So, going forward, the grant is in hand, contract is signed, and so the schedule for that is to continue throughout the next year with monthly meetings with the subgroup. Propose roughly to have a next community meeting to report out on those discussions, seek input at that time on the findings, where they are, roughly in November, so next fall. Proposing to put town meeting articles for appropriate actions on either this May or next May, or this May for the special legislation potentially if the communities support that, and next May for whatever the appropriate action would be, and to have a draft of a DHY agreement should the 3 subgroups believe that is in the best interest of their communities, to have that available as a goal next January. So with that, I would like to now have the Selectmen liaisons who have been part of the subgroup discussions actually say a few words. So with that, John?
Thank you, David. I'd first like to thank Chairman McCormick for allowing me to be our board's liaison to this Tri-Town Clean Waters Community Partnership with Yarmouth and Harwich. A special thanks goes to our town administrator, Liz Sullivan, and to Diane Chamberlain, the chair of our Wastewater Implementation Committee, for their guidance and efforts through the last 11 months of meetings. Thanks to David Young of CDM for his guidance and education of this process to all of us. Lastly, I'd like to thank my fellow liaisons, Mark Forrest of Yarmouth and Larry Ballantine of Harwich, for their efforts and contributions to this committee. As long as wastewater has been looked at by our town, our primary goal and the attitude of our Board of Selectmen has been to keep this project as cost-effective to every taxpayer in the town of Dennis. Other options were looked at, but deemed not viable as they were just too costly to the town. It would have been fiscally irresponsible for us not to investigate what cost savings would be available to our town with the project to include the towns of Yarmouth and Harwich. With Harwich already in a partnership with the town of Chatham for the east side of their town's clean water plan, it has provided us an advantage in understanding the possibility of a multi-town partnership. Both Larry and Town Administrator Chris Clark have been a wealth of information to all of us on this committee. From a personal viewpoint, the more I get educated on this project to clean the waters of our town, the more I see we have to do this. To that end, I wish to state that the Dennis Board of Selectmen voted to place and support this on the warrant at our March 20th Selectmen's meeting for our May town meeting.
Larry?
Thank you. I too want to thank my fellow board members. It's nice being a liaison when you have full support of your activity. I've enjoyed working with the, as John has said, working with others in our committee. I've learned a lot. Also, I've learned that we're much stronger working together than we are separately. Much has been said tonight, so I'm just going to highlight a couple items. Obviously, we're all told that money's not everything, but going through this project with the significant cost savings we're talking about is very important to us. We also know, as David said, that working together as partnerships greatly increases our chances of getting funding, both as we work together in formal applications and informally. We all have learned a lot from each other on what grants are available, how we can move ahead to save money, and do items more cost effectively. This also, for us, extends our short history, at least for the last couple of years, of partnering with neighboring towns. It started with Monomoy Regional School, which is a positive and very successful endeavor. We've moved to Muddy Creek, as David's mentioned, is working with Chatham. We've now signed an IMA to work with Chatham again on connecting to their wastewater sewer plant, their sewer facility. And Pleasant Bay for us has been an ongoing operation for probably 18, 20 years now, and is shown a very effective way for four towns to come together to protect a vital resource, which then this continues. And now, as Commissioner Suberg mentioned, we're moving ahead to work on a watershed permit with those safe form towns, which will allow the regulators a way to move forward on this process. And I have to say, I come from the private sector industry, and I'm not always in love with regulators, but Brian and Millie and everyone has been extremely helpful, and Aaron from Cape Cod Commission, of putting this together in a true partnership to make this happen in a way that's workable for us all. And it will not only save and help keep our waters clean, but will make it efficient as well. And regarding the plan going forward, I think what I'm repeating what's also been said, but this partnership allows us to possibly relook at our 8 phases going forward and move Route 28 up, the Route 28 corridor, up in the schedule to help us not only protect those waters, but we also have a need for economic development on that corridor. And this will give us a chance to move that up. And so again, I appreciate everyone being here and the support of my fellow selectmen.
Mark? Thank you. And thank everybody for being here tonight. It's great to see so many folks who have an interest in this issue here in Dennis. I too would like to thank my board for appointing me to serve on this committee. I'm not sure the enthusiasm was where it is today, because this is obviously an incredible undertaking, and I just have to say it's been a very, very positive and I don't want to say wonderful, but it's certainly been a great experience working with the selectmen from the other towns. It really has. Each town is bringing something unique and special to this conversation. I think one of the things that we bring to this is having had the experience of sort of stepping out and trying to take a fairly ambitious initiative back in 2011. And I was at that town meeting, as were my fellow board members. And I think one of the things that came across to me is just how difficult this challenge here is on Cape Cod. Our towns, we represent a lot of people that are struggling to get by, people that are, literally a paycheck away from finding themselves in a very difficult position. The expense of this is daunting, and it's overwhelming. And so from my point of view, I think one of the reasons why I really wanted to be on this group is because, particularly my background in securing funds for Cape Cod, given my past work, and finding a way to at least provide some advice and guidance on shaping this initiative in such a way that can help position us for being a priority for state and federal funding. We all know we can't do this alone. We all know that we're going to need the state and feds on board. That's an area where I certainly have some background and expertise, and I honestly think in the direction that we're headed, I think we're shaping this and positioning this initiative in such a way where we will get help at the state and federal level. And so, having said that, I think it's also important to understand that There's sort of three approaches to this. We've tried doing it by ourselves, and that was a challenge, and we heard from the voters loudly and clearly. The other approach is to work with our neighbors and our surrounding communities. Obviously, this is a watershed approach, and we need to have that kind of collaboration, so it's been wonderful to see it in our meetings. I think this initiative and the way that we're moving forward here, quite frankly, offers us a significant amount of savings to our taxpayers, and I think that's what we're all looking for. That's certainly what we're looking for in Yarmouth. We need to find a way to move forward while at the same time keep the burden to our taxpayers and to our homeowners as low as possible. I like the fact that we're collaborating on innovation, that we're finding ways to share the lessons learned from some of these other new technologies and new approaches. And as Dan had mentioned, there is a lot of work going on within the three towns to find ways to use state projects, state funding for roads and bridges and other improvements to find ways to sort of reduce the overall nitrogen load on our estuaries and embayments. So I'm excited at the point that we're at. I think we're at a very important moment in this initiative. I very much see this article as an important step forward, and I'm very much excited about where we're at, and I'm anxious to move ahead.
And now it's time to talk about the article. And I'll just read it because there's a very important part towards the end that everyone needs to take note of. To see if the town will vote to authorize and direct the Board of Selectmen in cooperation with the towns of the three of us, and to draft special legislation to create the DHY Clean Waters Community Partnership with substantially the powers, membership, governance, and purposes set forth in Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 21, Section 28 through 30, and the Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40N, supplemented and amended as the Board of Selectmen shall determine to be in the best interests of the town, to direct the Board of Selectmen to request that the state representative and senator representing the town file and support such special legislation, and to authorize the Board of Selectmen to take all action necessary to effect the foregoing, provided, however, and this is the important part, that such special legislation shall contain a condition that requires approval by town meeting in each of the towns participating in the final agreement before any agreement entered into pursuant to said special legislation takes effect or take any other action relative thereto. This means we have more work to do. We're not going to do anything until you all agree in each one of the towns that you're going to agree that this is exactly what we need to do. I would also mention to you that this verbiage was used by the Mansfield, Foxborough, Norton Consortium, the three towns. It was given to us to use, we tweaked it amongst ourselves, and then it was sent to the prospective town councils for each of Harwich, Yarmouth, and Dennis for them to take a look at to make sure that they were satisfied, because you can't do something like this without a few attorneys being involved, so we did that. So I would hope, as John had mentioned, Dennis discussed this on Tuesday night and approved it for placing and supporting. I believe Harwich has done it before. If we could flip the slide, you will see that what we're proposing is that we continue to move forward and participate in the Clean Waters Community Partnership process, and to place on our annual town meetings the warrant for May 2018, the special legislation article as presented. And I would just ask for an affirmation by my fellow selectmen from the three towns if they would agree to do that. And Tracy, you're at the end. I'll have you go first.
Thank you, Paul. Well, in terms of timing, we as a board have not had the opportunity to vote on this as the other towns have. We had it scheduled to be on our agenda for next Tuesday, but our agenda for today did recognize a vote for this. So our board, instead of doing it on Tuesday, I think if we have any questions or concerns, now is the time to talk about them, but I would like to take a motion from the board to see if they accept the proposed article for the special legislation as presented.
For motion?
Yes.
So moved.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second it for discussion.
Yes, please.
I would prefer to do this in our meeting Tuesday night rather than here tonight, personally. I don't know how the other board members feel, but that's my feeling.
Excuse me, I'd like to ask a couple questions about the article. Assuming that town meeting approves this article, A, can a member town subsequently unilaterally withdraw? And B, if yes or no, well, if yes, what would that process be?
I'll try. If you could help clarify for me, Selectman Stone, withdraw from when the special legislation is filed, or withdraw from an agreement once it's formed?
No, not the agreement, the special legislation, this piece of it. Suppose that town meeting approves this.
Yep.
And then, for whatever reason, during the process of trying to negotiate an agreement, one town just loses its appetite to continue. What happens then?
Well, the way the town meeting article was worded was it would be whichever towns are participating in the agreement at that time. So if it ended up just 2 towns move forward with the agreement versus all 3, whichever towns are participating in the agreement would need to approve it.
So just to clarify, I think, David, we had discussed this before when Dan had brought it forward, and this basically commits us to continuing to plan. The meat and potatoes will be in the actual agreement that will be put forth through this planning.
Yeah,
So
what this commits you to
nothing
tonight,
binding
what this commits a community, if they approve this, is to participating in the process, filing special legislation, but it does not commit you to being a member of the partnership. The agreement is what does that, and that agreement has to come back for a town meeting approval. So, in essence, all you're committing to is a potential to join a community partnership district.
Thank you. Did you have any other questions? Norm, did you have any questions?
I had the same question at our last select board meeting, and I know we've been provided with a very complicated document that goes through the Massachusetts general laws and that are referred to in this motion. And I'm interested in understanding more about that. It talks about a body politic, which says to me that it would be an independent organization and would not have, and that our select board would have little, if any, input into its business once it's up and operating. So I need to understand what that means exactly and how our select board's thoughts and interests would, in that operation, would be protected.
I can just add a little bit to that. Yes, if the agreement was ever generated, the 3 towns went forward, and you chose to become a part of that, these districts are separate, independent bodies. They have their own authority to bond, which is a good thing because it takes it off your Prop 2.5. The aggregate of the 3 towns' bond ratings is what they use for the first bond rating when the district would go out and bond. But yes, they have their own separate powers. Your input would be you appoint however many representatives from Yarmouth would be part of that commission that oversees this district. And I sent the out to all the towns. Don't know if everybody's had a chance to look at it. Probably not. I went online and pulled the Mass General Laws for the Chapter 21, Section 28 through 30, and 40N information and sent that out to all the town administrators this afternoon to distribute. Which all that really references is under the Mass General Law, the ability to create wastewater districts.
Can I add some commentary, Madam Chairman? Yeah, I think one of the things that might be helpful to understand is that, first of all, this article authorizes the communities to petition the legislature for the authorization, because we don't have the ability on our own to enter into this type of partnership that we're exploring. So I look at this as the initial step, and it begins the process of getting the legislature to be supportive of this enterprise. The other thing is that any agreements that will be worked on will be coming back to this board. This is going to be a process that will require the board's involvement and support. So I think in that sense, we have the opportunity to play a hands-on role, obviously with the other towns, in terms of shaping something that we're very comfortable with. So I think that's important to understand. So the way I look at this is an initial step. This gives us the ability to move one step further, but it doesn't necessarily approve anything because we really haven't had the chance to see what this framework would look like. The details have yet to be developed, but this is sort of the green light to go ahead and start exploring that and working on that. So that's the way I look at this, is it's sort of the initial step in exploring the way this collaboration and partnership among the three towns could work.
Thank you, Mark. And sorry to the other boards. I know you guys have already taken care of this. We haven't had the opportunity, but I did feel that it was a good time for us to have that discussion and get those questions answered while we were all here together. If our board is not comfortable voting on it tonight, that's fine. We can continue and do it on Tuesday, one way or the other. But I thought it would be a good opportunity to talk about it. Eric, would you still like to do it on Tuesday, or is it?
I'd like to see what other people have to say.
Okay.
I'd like to continue it to Tuesday.
Okay, if you want to remove your second and remove your motion, we will put it on our agenda for a Tuesday vote.
Great. We can hope on Tuesday that it'll come be forward. What I would add is that I come from a town that many years ago decided that they were going to solve their wastewater issues all by themselves, and that was what was going to happen. And subsequently, we all figured out that town water and water effluent doesn't know town boundaries. It has no idea what the maps were drawn above the Monomoy lens or the Sagamore lens and what goes on. And so the tide turned, no pun intended, to the fact that people started to think that we needed to do a regional approach. And that when we look at our neighbors to the east of Harwich, and I think many of us want to be Harwich because they're so far ahead on this, which is very good. And we hope that our neighbors to the west join us as well, because I think it would be a really good partnership, and I hope that there's a positive outcome at their meeting next Tuesday night, because I think it would be a really good thing to do. And I think at this point, we could open up questions or comments from the public if anyone would like to ask, or oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
First, I'd like to thank the town of Yarmouth and the town of Dennis for joining us at the table, and DEP for their support. We've talked about this the last few meetings, and we did take a vote Monday night at our Monday night's meeting to unanimously support putting this on the warrant. But for formality, we're going to revote it tonight.
Mr. Chair, that's exactly. We'd like to take this opportunity to reaffirm our vote, and my motion is to that we authorize and direct, we put this article on our town meeting warrant for the May 2018 meeting to support moving forward with the spatial legislation.
Second. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Any hesitancy that I've had in the past about supporting wastewater has always been based on the crushing debt that this is going to present to a certain portion of our community. This seems to me to be the ideal way to pursue something that would mitigate that possibility, working together so that we can solve a problem that is virtually insoluble alone. And on that basis, I think it's really important that we at least pursue what the options are together.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. Thank you.
I would ask that Dennis reaffirm as well.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I would ask that my fellow board selectmen once again affirm that of our participation in this Clean Waters Community Partnership process and place and support at our annual town meeting warrant for May of this 2018.
Is there a second? Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous.
This is Mark Forrest. Just one small matter. I would like to acknowledge an individual who's been very important to our committee work, and that's Diane Chamberlain. I know she's not sitting up here with us, but I can tell everybody that she's had an incredibly important influence on our deliberations. I have enormous respect for her work, and Diane, thank you for being involved in this. You've been terrific.
Questions or comments? Would love to take them. Yes, ma'am.
Gotta wait for the mic.
The microphone is going to come to you.
Vita Morris, Yarmouth. I just want to establish something. I believe when Yarmouth 7 years ago was considering this matter, the figure that was bandied about as being the cost for all of Cape Cod at the time was $8 billion to deal with this matter. Is that correct? I'm just, 8 billion?
That's a number that was been mentioned. I've never seen the backup to it, but yes.
And that particular number today is 4 billion, correct? More or less, whatever.
I can tell you what these three communities are looking at. I don't know what the whole Cape is unless the Cape Cod Commission might have a better number. But
I think that's pretty much where the number is coming from. I have heard it on radio programs. So that means the total was cut in half, correct? And I'm only working with the figures that you provided a year ago, which were breakouts for each town. But at the time, the cost to Yarmouth would be, if we were doing it alone, would be $342 million, according to your figures. The number that we were working with back 7 years ago was $350 million. So I don't see any kind of, certainly not anything like a 50% lower figure. How is that possible?
well, back in 2011, the number you were quoting did not include any of the work up in the Bass River because you did not have the Massachusetts Estuaries Project report study at that time. So we didn't know how much nitrogen needed to be removed. So if you look at the figures on the boards behind you, all those areas up north of Route 6 have now been added into the Yarmouth program because those areas need to have nitrogen removed. So therefore, the cost has gone up by several $1 million to address that area within the Yarmouth program.
But I can understand that it may have gone up by several $1 million. But if we take the total figure, when it goes from 8 billion to 4 billion, and Yarmouth practically nothing at all, something isn't adding up. And Yarmouth, which has the highest, the cost would be the highest from among the three towns, would see the least amount of savings, according to your figures from last year also.
Yeah, the savings for the three towns is in the treatment process and in the effluent reuse process. Each community still has to do the amount of nitrogen removal required to meet the total maximum daily load limit within that, and that's 2/3 of the cost or more in each of the communities. So by joining this community partnership, you're not saving on the collection system and where you have to remove the nitrogen. What you're saving is in the economy of scale of when you have to go treat what you're collecting and then when you recharge that. So that's the 1/3 portion of the program.
Actually, I think it would have been very helpful to have these figures from last year repeated here, because you're saying that the savings will be $100 billion based on what figures?
That's looking at the aggregate of the three, but the flow proportions are changing, and all that will be flushed out, no pun intended, over the next year at these meetings now that we have a grant to re-look at those numbers and use the latest costs being generated within each community.
Well, I just think it would, at least, you know, a year ago, you were willing to put down some figures instead of just, you know, saying, oh, the savings will be such and such, based on what figures? I mean, I think, also, I'd like to ask if, how about, has anybody considered that so-called sawdust solution for removing the residential septic tank system, the removal of nitrogen from the house residential septic systems?
I believe you're referring to what's known as a passive nitrogen removal system. They're being pilot tested up at the Otis Test Center. George Hoyfelter from the Barnstable County is the one overseeing that program. It's been, there are no final results yet. They're trying to do that through the cold weather climate. But the town of Dennis, and we actually have been training phone calls, potentially even with this building, to see if they might be able to do a full-scale pilot at this building. But so far, the conclusions are not out there yet as to how well it works in this climate.
Is it true that it seems to be working in Canada?
Again, we're trying to do it here on Cape Cod and find out what the results would be here, and George Hoyfelter is in charge of that program, and he said it's inconclusive right now.
So they need to work on it further?
Yes.
But it may very well end up being the kind of thing that can be used.
Well,
and
even
very
that,
inexpensively.
Even that will not remove, if we put one of those on every on-lot system, we will not remove enough nitrogen to meet those total max daily loads. So we would need to still do additional nitrogen removal through some municipal collection system.
Maybe I misread the article in the Register, but I thought that it would take care of it. Yeah, it sounded like.
Anyone else with a question or a comment? Yes, sir. Mr. Dudley.
Brian Dudley from DEP. I think I would just like to clarify a point that the previous speaker made, in that it's true that there was an $8 billion figure that was proposed as the cost for sewering 100% of the Cape. We've never advocated sewering 100% of the Cape. So an $8 billion figure really is the absolute worst case scenario that was never anticipated. So it's probably not the best benchmark by which to determine overall cost savings. Because I think if originally, when we were looking at more traditional approaches, or relying solely on more traditional approaches, we were somewhere in the $4 to $5 billion range, if for the entire Cape. So I think that probably is a better benchmark by which to measure cost savings. I hope that provides some clarification and some basis of comparison.
Thank you, Brian. Anyone else? Any other comments from the board members? Then, yes, sir. Mr. Sears.
Curtis Sears from Yarmouth. I think one of the things we need to consider when we talk about the cost is the difference in cost between having to replace your Title V system and being on sewer is number one. I think we need to consider the impacts of having to strip your land to make the room to put your Title V system on many of these lots. The pump-up systems, which then Dave would know much better than I would, but probably approach somewhere near the cost of getting into sewers. And then I think there's the difference in property values on sewered properties versus otherwise. And I think when you talk about the contaminants of emergent concern, if you are collecting it and treating it, as opposed to just building wider bridges to flush the estuaries, you can better control those issues. Where if you don't, if you're just leaning on flushing, say a river or a creek of some sort, that's still going to be there causing a problem, I think. So it should be considered in the planning process also.
Good points, thanks.
Yeah, no, I didn't want to leave the illusion that just increasing flushing is the only solution. What that does is it cuts down on the residents' time, which allows algae and other things to occur. So we want to increase that flushing in those areas. We need to look at all mitigation impacts. Don't want to make sure we're flooding something out or creating a worse issue. So there's still a lot of work to be done on that, particularly the Route 6, which would be the widest bridge being proposed of the three mentioned tonight. So it's not the end all, but it's part of the solution.
Anyone else? With that, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. I mean, certainly this is not a glamorous subject, but it's one that we do have to discuss. We're all involved in it. We've all got to find a solution for it, and I think we're going to go that way. Liz reminded me of an interesting story that we have shared, and there's been a number of people that have come into the town of Dennis. I only know the town of Dennis side. That have come into the town of Dennis and have purchased a house and assume that they have sewers already because they do at home, and they're shocked to find out that they don't down here. And I think we've got to move towards that because people think we have it already and they have no idea. So with that, each individual board needs to adjourn their meeting, and I thank you all for coming, and we'll be in touch soon with something else. So is there a move to adjourn? Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all for coming.